as you get situated, I was thinking that a friend of mine told me that her son's therapist said that it seemed marijuana use was connected to schizophrenia. And I thought, gosh, I really need to look into this because this is very disturbing. I wasn't sure whether these were fairly isolated incidents or if it was something that she was seeing a lot of. And then you do this piece in the New York Times with the headline, "As America's marijuana use grows, so do the risks." By the way, everyone, Megan is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter for the New York Times. She is the co-author of She Said and Chasing the Truth. Of course, she's one of the journalists who broke the story of Harvey Weinstein and his sexual harassment and abuse wide open. She ignited the Me Too movement, and now she's turning her lens on marijuana. I mean, you've written a lot of other pieces between then and now, Megan. But tell me why you wanted to explore this topic in the first place.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that you'd have to be living under a rock to not have picked up on the fact that there's been a huge shift in marijuana in our country. As legalization of marijuana has accelerated across the country in various states, this massive commercial industry has sprung up. There's now a $33 billion legal industry that is turning out products, and those products are so much more potent than you sort of could have ever imagined a generation ago. And cannabis use, marijuana use in this country has also been going through like significant shifts. There are not only more people using marijuana than ever before, but they are also like growing numbers of people who are using it almost like every day or nearly every day. So you've got more people using more potent product more frequently. And I wanted to understand whether or not, what were the implications of that? Were people being harmed from these products? And so that kicked off like a multi-month investigation that I did actually with two of my colleagues at the Times.
I was going to mention, do you want to say their names? Because I feel like we should give them credit.
Danielle Ivory and Carson Kessler were the two reporters who joined me in this investigation.
And you did exhaustive research, and you also commissioned some studies like from the Columbia Epidemiology Department. And I wanted to ask you first and foremost, you can't walk out on the streets of New York City without being accosted, even at 7 a.m, by the smell of marijuana, pot, weed, whatever the vernacular is you choose to use. But I wondered when you started to write this piece, if there was any part of you, since there's been so much focus, Megan, on legalizing marijuana for not only medicinal, but now recreational use. It's legal in 24 states and the District of Columbia. Ballot initiatives in North Dakota, South Dakota, and Florida may mean it's legal for recreational use in more than half the country. Yeah. But was any part of you wondering, gosh, if I write this piece, am I going to be seen as sort of a church lady? Is this going to be a literal buzzkill for people who have been fighting so hard to legalize this drug?
Yeah.
Did that thought cross your mind?
To some extent, but there's also a huge difference. Like legalization began in this country in the name of medical marijuana.
Right.
There were, patients who were suffering from AIDS and cancer who were going public and saying like, listen, this is a medicine. This is a drug that has helped us. It's therapeutic. And there were doctors who were testifying to that. And then obviously that was what followed was the increasing legalization of recreational marijuana. And that there were good reasons for doing that as well. The fact that there were people who were being arrested and locked up for this, for marijuana offenses, especially a disproportionate number of them Black and brown, was like, there was growing acknowledgement that that was a problem and that wasn't right. And there was also this promise that if you legalized marijuana, you'd actually be making it more safe, and that if it came under the regulation of states that were legalizing it, there would be more oversight, there actually would be regulation, and consumers would be better protected.
But what's happened, Megan, right? Because I was going to say, according to your piece, it's still illegal federally and considered, I guess, a controlled substance. So ergo, any kind of regulation or actual federal dollars to study it and research it hasn't happened, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Katie. So what happened, and as we kind of started to immerse ourselves in this reporting and we wanted to learn more, what we realized is that, first of all, the regulation that's taking place is really a hodgepodge of state laws and regulations. And because it has remained illegal at the federal level, that has made it really difficult. There's been massive challenges to doing research into the drug. And so there's actually very little scientific evidence informing consumers on the marijuana of today, especially since it's undergone such a massive transformation. Meanwhile, you've had this industry this $33 billion commercial industry that has sprung up that is turning out these extremely potent products that we had not seen in mass like this before. And so what we realized is that meanwhile the medical system has not been sort of adequately tracking the effects of this. So what we realized is that collectively what this amounted to was largely like a big public health experiment that was being done in this country, and with marijuana consumers as the subjects, sort of unknowing subjects.
How much of a challenge, I was going to ask you, Megan, did that present in your reporting? Because I think one of many things I took away is all marijuana is not created equal, right? So you have all different marijuana compounds. You have different levels of THC, which is the drug that gets you high, or the part of marijuana that gets you high, right? The ingredient.
That's right.
And then you have it in different forms like gummies and things like that. So how did you do your research if there's no uniform sort of marijuana, I guess, compound, if you will?
Right. So you're right. THC, the marijuana has there's many components to marijuana. THC is an intoxicating component. And that is a component that is really skyrocketed in all of these products that are coming out of the commercial industry. And so, listen, the fact that there wasn't a lot of research, the fact that there wasn't a lot of healthcare data on this, those were challenges to our reporting. Those were findings, right? We realized that there wasn't a lot of known information going into this huge public health experiment. And that third, we had a real opportunity to go out and gather information on our own. And we did that in a variety of ways, like old-fashioned reporting. We worked the phones, we called doctors, we called medical experts, we started reaching out to people on Facebook groups that had come together to talk about their experiences with marijuana. We poured through the research that did exist. And then we actually got even more systemic in our approach to reporting. We started we partnered with this researcher at Columbia University to go in and do an analysis of the national survey on drug use that's done every year in this country and reaches a huge number of people and produces really telling findings about what's going on with drug use. We ended up doing surveys. We ended up surveying hundreds of doctors from a variety of fields across the country to see what they were experiencing and seeing with their patients. And we also ended up interviewing surveying hundreds of people who had been harmed by marijuana. So we were able to not just kind of compile a lot of compelling anecdotal stories about people's experience with this drug, but also a lot of meaningful data that could help explain the scope of what was going on.
And it seemed to me that let's dig into sort of the different areas you found, Megan. And by the way, I'm speaking with Megan Twohey of the New York Times, who in the last couple of weeks has written a very exhaustive piece along with two of her colleagues about the dangers of marijuana, which I think is so important. And I'm hoping a lot of parents are listening. And because one of the distressing things that I saw in your reporting, or you found in your research, is that between the ages, 4.5 million people between the ages of 18 and 25 use marijuana daily or near daily. And 81% of them meet the criteria for something called cannabis use disorder. Now, this has to do with the addictive properties of marijuana. And cannabis use disorder basically means you have to, that if they continue to use the drug despite significant negative effects on their lives. And of those 18 million people, sorry, let me go back. 18 million people, nearly one third of all users 18 and up have reported symptoms of cannabis use disorder. That means they continue to use the drug despite significant negative effects on their lives. Of those, about 3 million people are considered addicted.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is, how addictive is marijuana? According to your reporting, Megan, pretty damn addictive.
Right. So to be clear, I want to start before we kind of dive into the harms, which are obviously like very significant and very meaningful. I want to start by saying that yes, there are a lot of people who use marijuana in this country, about 58 million. About 18 or 19 million use it on a daily or near daily basis. And there are many people, in fact, most people who are using this drug, whether it's for medical purposes or recreationally, aren't having problems with it. But what we realized in the course of our reporting is that there are growing subsets of users, especially chronic users, who are facing real harms, experiencing real harms. Cannabis use disorder is one of those harms. And so if you want to get a sense of like, well, how many people who are using this drug are basically ending up cannabis use disorder, addictions at the severe end of cannabis use disorder, it's 11 criteria that help identify whether somebody has a problem, if the drug is having a negative impact on their life. And there's, whether they're developing tolerance to it, if they have cravings for it, if they're using it in spite of it having, negative effects on their work life or their social life. There's a whole set of criteria, and if you meet 2 of those criteria, you're considered to have a mild case of cannabis use disorder. If you meet 6 or more of those criteria, you're considered to have a severe disorder, widely seen as addiction. Well, we partnered with this researcher at Columbia University, Deborah Hassan, who went into the findings of this national survey on drug use and found that 30% of cannabis users, that's roughly 18 million people, met the criteria for cannabis use disorder. Like they acknowledged, they were reporting this as having a negative effect on my life. And I think about 3 million of those folks at the severe end met the criteria for addiction. And if you went into the 18 to 25-year-olds, those numbers were even like more pronounced. And what was interesting is like, as we started to report on, interview more and more doctors, we got a better understanding of how that can actually play out for individuals. Like marijuana interfaces with this interesting thing called the endocannabinoid system in our body, which helps regulate like our digestive tract and our brain development and all these different components, like important bodily functions. And when our systems get overridden with chronic use of THC, it can make your system out of basically knock that endocannabinoid system out of whack, and you need to escalate your use to get the same effects. And if you stop using, you can experience anxiety, depression, and other symptoms of withdrawal. So we didn't just identify the scope of cannabis use disorder, but we were able to kind of identify what that's like in practice for the people who are experiencing it. And it's sort of sadly ironic because there are growing numbers of people who are using marijuana to treat anxiety and depression, to self-medicate mental health issues, and yet if they overrun their system with THC, it can end up having that complete opposite effect.
So how do you deal with a cannabis addiction? Do you have to go to rehab? Is there medically supervised withdrawal? I mean, tell us about that.
Yeah. So there is, first of all, if you experience opioid addiction, there's actually there are drugs that you can be prescribed to help you get through that. There's not the same for marijuana. There's researchers who are trying to identify drugs that could help people quit, but so far, no luck. They don't have that. And what we found is that there's actually not, a lot of these cases don't end up in the traditional rehab center. The numbers of people turning to groups like Marijuana Anonymous are going up. I don't think many people know that there is an Alcoholic Anonymous equivalent for marijuana users who are struggling. Mm-hmm. And so, those numbers are going up. Those people are going to those meetings more and more. And there's different types of kind of therapeutic strategies that can be used to help people get through this. But what we found time and again, and cannabis use disorder was like one of 3 major harms that we identified in the course of our reporting, is that oftentimes people are running up against this misconception that marijuana is not addictive, that it's this completely safe, natural drug and you can't get addicted. And so at every turn in our reporting, we were finding we started to identify this theme of dangerous misconceptions about the drug, which can basically make people less inclined to like recognize what's going on with them, but can
Right.
also like show up in the medical system. Like there were dangerous misconceptions that can also extend into the medical system. Doctors who aren't aware of these issues.
Right. As you said earlier in our conversation, this is sort of a big public health experiment
Right.
because the research actually didn't predate the legalization of the drug. You also talk in your piece about something called cannabinoid hyperemesis.
Hyperemesis syndrome. Yes, it's a mouthful. It's known as CHS for short.
And that is when your marijuana use is marked, or heavy cannabis use is marked by nausea, vomiting, and pain. And it's often, as someone in your piece was, misdiagnosed by medical professionals, and it's treated with heat. So tell us about that and some of the issues it can cause if it goes on too long or isn't
Yeah,
treated or
sure.
diagnosed.
Yeah, this can be a very, very serious syndrome. And it actually first surfaced, it wasn't identified until 2004 was the first time that it was documented. And so the rise of CHS really maps onto the acceleration of legalization and commercialization of marijuana in this country and these increasingly potent products. And the medical system and researchers still don't know why certain people, certain heavy users of cannabis get this and others don't. They're still trying to figure that out. But for the people who do get it, it can be like a very, very, very serious condition. It's another sort of interesting, it's also another example of some of the dangerous misconceptions about marijuana. Like marijuana is widely seen and understood to be good for treating nausea, and that is absolutely true. It can and does have that effect on people who are suffering from nausea. But for these certain chronic users, it actually takes this like, it has the opposite effect at some point, and it actually is inducing severe nausea and vomiting and cycles of it that just go on and on and on. And oftentimes people are presenting to the emergency room over and over and over because they don't know what's going on, and they're completely scared about this, they don't know where it's coming from. They had never heard of it. And it's often called, I mean, it's so painful. It can be so painful for some people. The word that they use is scromiting, because that people are often in so much pain that they're screaming while they're vomiting. And so this can cause severe dehydration, kidney failure, cardiac arrest. And yet it took a while for the medical system to recognize it when it started presenting. I mean, there's been a sharp rise in this across the country. Emergency doctors will tell you this, and they are seeing it much more often. It is by many measures like common in certain areas of this country, but there was a learning curve. And so oftentimes people would go in over and over and over, and they were misdiagnosed. Sometimes they actually underwent like unnecessary medical procedures, like getting their gallbladders removed.
I know.
And
Oh,
so,
that woman in the piece had that happen to her.
yeah, she had started taking, this is a woman in a suburb of Illinois who had started taking, she actually started taking marijuana at the
For
recommendation of a doctor for migraines
migraines.
that she had. And, it took, and the marijuana helped with migraines, but then she started to develop nausea. And so she went to her medical dispensary, the marijuana dispensary, and they said, oh, you're experiencing nausea. You should take more marijuana and it'll help with that. And soon she was just having these like severe episodes of severe vomiting. It got to the point where she was, it was debilitating. She had to stop working, and she kept going to the hospital and to other medical settings saying, what is going on with me? This is just getting worse and worse. And, she had a gallbladder removed. She had one of her breast implants removed. She heard over and over again that it was probably just the menopause that she was experiencing. And it took her own online research before she was able to find, she eventually found a Facebook group that's now, I think, almost 30,000 members of people
Wow.
who are suffering from CHS, who are coming together and swapping their symptoms and, tips for how to recover, that she was able to realize what was going on with her. And she stopped. And, the only way to recover from cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome is to stop using marijuana. And when she quit, like, her symptoms went away.
I know somebody asked me on social if marijuana damage is reversible. So obviously in this case it is, but the one I think the most disturbing aspect of your reporting, and this is, I was mentioning to my followers as they were hopping on, Megan, that a friend of mine told me, a therapist she knew said she was seeing a lot of schizophrenia in young men who were smoking pot. And I was, and as, oh, I think I mentioned that to you and you hopped on. And so tell us about that. Is that the same as cannabis induced temporary psychosis, or tell us about
Yeah, yeah,
the really actually pretty serious
yeah.
psychological impact this is having on some people, to emphasize your earlier point.
Right. So to be clear, when we're talking about cannabis use disorder, you absolutely, I mean, people are able to quit marijuana. They are able to recover, and their bodies go back to normal, and they move on, and they're fine. Same with cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. People quit who are able to quit cannabis can fully recover. I think that this third harm that we identified is perhaps the most scary, because the links between cannabis use and psychosis are real, they're pronounced, and they're also not widely known. And there's sort of two different types that I want to talk about. One is cannabis-induced, like temporary psychotic episode. And this can happen to people of all ages, whether they're chronic users of marijuana or first-time users of marijuana. Whether they have other risk factors for psychosis or no risk factors for psychosis. But there are people who consume marijuana, and it causes them to experience like a temporary psychotic episode, hallucinations, paranoia. And what we heard from our surveys and interviews of doctors is that they are seeing this more and more often as more and more people consume cannabis and more potent cannabis. There's another relationship between marijuana and psychosis, and there's a growing body of evidence that shows that marijuana can contribute to the development of a chronic psychotic disorder, like schizophrenia being the most well-known and the most prevalent. And this is something that has been documented in a growing body of research. It's actually, and doctors told us that they were seeing this, that they were seeing more and more cases of people for whom they believe strongly that marijuana was contributing to the development of a more chronic psychotic disorder. And we didn't just talk to doctors who had observed that. We didn't just pour through the research on this. We talked to people, who have experienced, whether it's temporary psychosis or have tipped into more severe psychotic disorders that appear to be linked to their marijuana use. And none of them had any idea about the connection. There was one of the leading experts on this is a psychiatrist at Yale University, and he compared it to the association between smoking cigarettes and lung cancer, the connection between marijuana use and the development of these chronic psychotic disorders. He said, not everybody who gets lung cancer smokes cigarettes. Not everyone who smokes cigarettes gets lung cancer, but we know after many, many decades that there's a significant association there. And the same is true for marijuana and chronic psychotic disorders.
So that's really scary to me. So how prevalent is this? I mean, is this, obviously your research uncovered it, but, how widespread is sort of this idea that marijuana use or cannabis consumption contributes to schizophrenia, and or schizophrenia like
Yeah.
illnesses, because and you talk about chronic, so does it mean a permanent state, because schizophrenia doesn't kind of go away and it's got to be treated with medication, right?
Oh, it can be a lifelong, it can be a lifelong condition. And it is, listen, it's one of the more rare mental health illnesses, affecting like 1 to 3% of the population. But it's also one of the most debilitating. And for the folks who in the medical world who know about this association, they say, like, listen, there's going to be components that go into your, there's going to be risk factors that are at play in developing a chronic psychotic disorder that are beyond people's control, like family history, for example. But here is something that can be controlled. And so, for anybody who does have any family history of psychotic disorders or psychosis, like especially leading up to 25 when the brain development has like slowed down.
Well, also, isn't schizophrenia usually diagnosed in people in their early 20s?
Right. So it normally surfaces in, later adolescence. And this is like a very sort of important time in brain development. It's when psychotic disorders can surface. And we also know that, that this is the time when marijuana can have the most harmful effects, by and large, in general, like when the brain is still developing up through 25. So the fact that you now have, especially among 18 to 24-year-olds, that like cannabis use has skyrocketed. There's now not only more people who are using the drug on a daily or near daily basis than using alcohol. There are more people in that age group who are, who are experiencing cannabis use disorder than having alcohol use disorder in that age group. So you have to imagine, like, oh my goodness, you're taking like the most vulnerable age group for developing a chronic psychotic disorder, and you're sort of piling in marijuana. You're piling in heavy use of marijuana and heavy use of extremely potent product of marijuana. And I talked to one researcher who said, I think this is a recipe for a psychotic disorder epidemic in your country. And it's not being adequately like documented or tracked in any way, but we certainly heard from many, many doctors across the country that they were seeing more of this and that they were really worried about it. And we also talked to people who were experiencing it firsthand, a young man in Colorado who started using tried marijuana at the encouragement of his girlfriend, who said, oh yeah, it's a nice way to chill out and relax. And he took a bong hit, and within like 15 minutes was like, seeing demons and having other terrible hallucinations.
I think we've heard of that, like in various crimes. I mean, once in a while you read in the news like a psychotic episode.
Yeah.
I don't know if they know that it was brought on by marijuana, but that's obviously a possibility and really scary. A couple questions I wanted to kind of unravel here, or topics, was, the use of cannabis has increased dramatically. Do we know why?
Well, I mean, I
I
think
guess because it's legal, right?
there's going to be multiple factors that go into it. And I guess I'm going to kind of I spend so much time talking to scientists that like I can recognize the difference between like a clear cause and of the black and white cause and effect of things versus the associations. I mean, what I can tell you for sure is that there's a very strong association between the growing use of marijuana, the growing sort of regular use of this drug, and the acceleration of legalization, and not just legalization, but commercialization of this drug in this country. This $33 billion industry that is turning out these products and promoting them as not just totally safe, but also good for you and good for your well-being. And there's no question that marijuana has therapeutic benefits and can be really helpful and can be a totally pleasurable experience without harm. But what you're not hearing from the industry, and what you're also not hearing from the states that are legalizing, is that there are these real risks. If you look at the states that have legalized, very few require the industry to put on their products that it can be habit forming and addicting. Even fewer, I think it's like maybe 2, require that the association with psychosis be disclosed. The same goes for this cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which, in certain cases we found could be fatal. We were able to sort of document many, multiple deaths that had happened to people who suffered from CHS. So I think that that's part of the problem here, is that people are at this dangerous confusion and these dangerous misconceptions about it.
And you mentioned earlier that the THC in cannabis today is much more potent than it was in the 90s. So, how is THC monitored? And if there's no regulation, you don't really know the level of THC in the marijuana that you're buying, or even in the gummies you're buying, or do you?
Well, you do. You do, and it's actually been, as these products have been rolled out onto a legal market where people can kind of not just do price comparisons, but can check to see like, well, how potent is this product that I'm getting? What's the level of THC? And as that sort of unfolded, and as people were able to see like, oh, this has, 20% THC. This has, for example, in the 90s, your average marijuana flower that is, rolled up into a joint or blunt or what have you, or sometimes placed into a bong to smoke, that I think was like maybe 3, 4, 5% THC. And now the flower can be as high as 20, 25% THC. There's like pure THC, almost pure THC extracts that are now sold, known as dabs or waxes or shatters, where people are able to consume as much as like almost 90, 99% THC in like one hit. There are gummies, that have various levels of THC milligram content. And so while people are seeing those on the packages, there hasn't, by and large, there has not been any regulation of how potent these products can be and how much they've been able to kind of radically transform through commercialization. There have been states that have capped the amount of THC that can go into gummies, into these edibles that are, first of all, very easy for children to get into, small children to like open up and think they might be. But for these other marijuana products, like there's really been no caps or otherwise regulation of how potent they can be.
Wow. There are tons of questions. I know we're not going to have time to get to all of them, but let me just get to a couple. Can you explain the difference between CBN and CBG, difference if taken daily versus THC? I have no idea what this means. Do you?
Yeah, so those, those are references to these other components. Once again, the marijuana plant, there's many components to it. THC and also CBD is another well-known component of the marijuana plant that is also being sort of extracted and sold. CBD is not intoxicating. It can, it's widely sold as having these therapeutic benefits, and it can have those therapeutic benefits without the intoxicating component. And in terms of, the reference to the other two of the other components of marijuana, I can't sort of speak with authority to those and how they compare. They're two of the like lesser used and lesser sold components. But by and large, for the most part, when you turn to the legal, commercial market here, they are selling. The focus is all THC. The intoxicating component, and making products that are as intoxicating as possible.
Someone asked if marijuana users are advised not to operate heavy machinery.
If that's like, is that something that's on the warning label, I guess, of these products? There may be some warnings along those lines on some of the products that are being sold. We were looking much more at the kind of these more serious health effects that people were experiencing from the drug.
Someone asked, what are your thoughts, Megan, on California Sober, a support community that endorses marijuana to get off alcohol?
Yeah, well, listen, first of all, I want to just stress how in the course of doing this reporting, I became completely sold on the fact that marijuana can have real medical benefits when used in certain ways with certain patients at certain regimens. And I know that there is interesting research going on right now to see like how, to what extent marijuana can help people get off opioids. I think that's research that's still ongoing. There's not necessarily hard, conclusive evidence one way or another right now. And I know that there are people who have used marijuana as they've tried to transition out of heavy alcohol use. And I have no doubt that there are people for whom that is beneficial. I was at a party the other night and a woman was telling me about her experience with that marijuana helped her quit drinking. At the same time, there's also no question that the marijuana industry, this commercial industry that's sprung up, is basically promoting marijuana as something that is like completely beneficial and in contrast to alcohol. And obviously alcohol has harms and risks as well. Right. And but I think that there's also kind of a false comparison that sometimes is being made very purposely, which is that it's like that this is a completely safe alternative to alcohol, and
that's just not true for
true.
everyone.
That's just not true for everyone.
Someone asks, are liquid and concentrated versions like shatter? Hey, everybody, this is way above my knowledge, but are they more addictive? Liquid and concentrated versions like shatter. I'm getting quite an education here, Megan.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I know that there are a lot of medical experts who believe that it is, and I've talked to a lot of consumers.
What are liquid and concentrated versions? Just what they said, I guess,
Yeah,
right?
there's different ways that you can extract the intoxicating component from the plant and like get almost pure, pure concentrates of it that can be consumed in different ways. And this is one of the ways in which the product has just radically transformed. And so while there was minimal research, the medical field was behind in research, has been behind in its research of marijuana for decades, but it's fallen even further behind as the products have like accelerated in their transformation. So here's a good example. Like in 2017, the National Academies of Science put out a report. They like reviewed all the research on marijuana and put out a report saying this is what's known about benefits and harms. But they made clear in that report, they said even then in 2017, like there is a lack of evidence-based information on this drug that poses a public health risk. So here we are 7 years later, and I talked to somebody, the National Academies of Science actually just did another review of like cannabis policies and the effects of cannabis policies on health. And I talked to one of the authors of that report, and I said, you guys made this warning about the dangers of like there being a lack of kind of scientific evidence informing the use of this drug in 2017. Where are we now, 7 years later? And she said, oh my God, we're so much farther behind than we were then. And she said, I think it would be a mistake. She didn't mince words. She was like, I think it would be a mistake to put all of these products that have like emerged on the market under some like umbrella of a safe legal drug.
Right.
That's just not the case. And so they're scrambling, the medical world is scrambling to figure out, there's an assumption and there's like a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that the more potent products are more addicting and you can suffer more severe withdrawal going through those. But they're just still so far behind in the research.
I just have to ask you a couple other questions. A number of people are saying that they have a gummy at night to help them sleep. Is that a problem? Someone else is asking, are there reports of more car accidents? Sorry, I'm just doing this. Car accidents as a result of marijuana use. And thirdly, someone asked, how do I talk to my young adult child about some of these dangers? So let's take the first one. Taking a gummy before you go to bed. Some of my friends say it improves their sex life. I don't know, but is that a dangerous thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that if anybody is turning to marijuana to, help with their sleep or to help with any kind of other health issue, I would strongly encourage them to go out and find some of the medical experts, the doctors who are experts on this. I mean, they were some of the most impressive people that I encountered. It doesn't mean that, listen, there's a lot of doctors out there who will just, talk to you for 10 minutes and say, okay, yeah, I approve you going off and getting marijuana in the medical dispensaries. And that's very different than talking to like a doctor who's knowledgeable and can like walk you through sort of safe ways to use this drug to treat various like health issues. I would also say that, marijuana affects people's bodies and their systems differently. Like the way that a 5 milligram gummy affects you may be very different than how it affects somebody else. And you're also, I think, getting to another point that's really important, which is that there are different phases of daily use of marijuana. There are people who take a couple puffs of a joint, when they get home from work to unwind the way that somebody might have a drink. And, that may be totally fine. But what we found was that when we're looking at some of the people who are most at risk for these harms, is that these are folks a lot of these folks were using multiple times a day, basically all day, everyday users. And there's certain products that have made that easier. There's now these marijuana vapes, which are especially attractive and popular to, teenagers because They don't make a marijuana smell. You can like very discreetly take puffs off it, and these kids can use it in school and at home without detection. And so, I think that people who have those sort of more chronic, all day, every day consumption habits, are the ones who should really make sure that they're educated in some of these risks and harms.
So a teenage son who's using marijuana, how can I best educate him about the risk? I guess give him your story and, and I guess monitor if they're using it. I mean, what am I? I'm very anti this. I mean, even though my kids probably do it, but I just sort of, especially, I don't get when people do it are constantly high. It's such a weird way to go through life. Not being judgmental here, but just seems so foreign to me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, listen, I think that as I said, teens should know at the very least that they're the ones who are most vulnerable to harms from marijuana because their brains are still developing. Up through 25, they're more susceptible to cannabis use disorder. We know that there's this risk of not just the cannabis-induced temporary psychotic episode, but the association with the more chronic psychotic disorders like schizophrenia. So I think it's just really, my job as a journalist is not to be prescriptive, and it's
Right.
not to offer advice, but this is, our hope, and the story that we published 2 weeks ago is we're working on more stories, and we're continuing to report into this because we think it's really important for whether it's cannabis consumers themselves or the parents of people who are using marijuana to just be equipped with the facts.
Well, I guess I wanted to ask you, did you do any research about more car accidents as a result of marijuana use?
Yeah, I think that I have not, I've sort of skimmed I've skimmed some of that research, but I can't speak with authority on it. Once again, we are at the New York Times. There are multiple reporters who are going down different reporting tracks on this. So I think it's very likely that readers of the New York Times will be getting more information on that specific issue at some point sooner rather than later.
Before we go, Megan, I just wanted to ask you what you hope the outcome will be of this reporting and this continued effort by Times reporters on this subject. I know that you interviewed someone from the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and something. I've only heard of the National Academy of Sciences, but
That's it.
are people wanting cannabis to be obviously it needs more research and more collaborative research, right? But B, do you think that the result of this reporting might lead to to actually some regulation of this?
Yeah. Well, listen, marijuana right now it kind of holds a unique space in our country. It is made available both as like a recreational drug, like cigarettes, like tobacco, and also as medicine, like opioids. But it doesn't come with any of the, federal regulation and oversight that go along with those other substances. And so what's clear is that this patchwork of state laws and regulations that don't require warning labels about the association with psychosis by and large, or that it can be addictive, or and that aren't adequately or even equipped to track the health outcomes. That there have been some real failures here at the government level, in the medical system that's also not adequately documenting the ill effects of this drug. And what we heard time and again from people who had been harmed by cannabis was, it's not like they had reached the conclusion that this is a terrible drug. All the doctors that we talk to, by and large, support legalization. There's just a sense that there's a lot more that needs to be done to protect consumers and make sure that they have the adequate information to inform their use of this.
Right.
So many people said, I wish I'd just been warned. Like the woman who, for example, who started experiencing this cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, and her response was to increase her marijuana use because she didn't know that it was actually causing her harm, and she got much, much worse to the point that she had to stop working. She was like, people just need the information to be able to make these informed decisions.
And I thought it was interesting that you wrote that the U.S., this country is kind of an outlier in terms of how progressive it's been about cannabis legalization, right?
Yeah, this was one of my first sort of surprising realizations as I started this reporting, was that the United States is like really a global outlier when it comes to legalizing recreational marijuana. That, you know, it's important to realize that there's different kind of variations to how you govern marijuana or various substances. Like you can decriminalize it and make sure, sort of say that people aren't going to go to jail for this. There's not going to be criminal penalties for this, up through like our country not only legalizing the recreational use, but like basically greenlighting the whole commercialization of it. And there's only like, you know, there's only several other countries that have done that. You know, Canada and Uruguay among them. And so we're really at the forefront here. We are, you know, to go back to this theme of a kind of public health experiment, an unintended public health experiment. You know, we're really at the forefront of that.
Well, it's a really interesting piece. Congratulations on such great reporting, Megan. And by the way, someone named Diana wrote me and said, in Texas, we have the Texas Compassionate Use Program. I was able to get THC tincture in order to get off prescription fentanyl. I wanted off fentanyl. Most pain docs wouldn't help me. Now I take CBN tincture for sleep. It's very helpful. We're all still learning about all of this. So that might be an interesting story, a follow-up story, this Texas Compassionate Use Program.
Yeah, that's great
to help people get off fentanyl, since fentanyl addiction is such a huge problem in this country. Anyway, Megan, I kept you much longer than I told you I would. Thank you so much. And hopefully this is really helpful to people watching, and good luck with all your other reporting. And it's always great to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, Megan, see you soon, I hope. Bye, everyone. Bye.